And so I'm going to go ahead and get started with a few introductions. So first I'll introduce our presenters. So we have Ali Ulwelling. If you want to give a wave, Ali. She is the Forestry Assistance Specialist with the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, and she also works with Firesafe Montana. We also have Rick Connell. He'll give a wave for us. Well, he is the Fire Management Officer for the U.S. Forest Service Flathead National Forest. And as I said, the Flathead Conservation District is facilitating and hosting the webinar. So again, my name is Michaela Richardson. I'm the Big Sky Watershed Corps member. We also have Haley Graff. She is our resource conservationist. And then we have Samantha Tappenbeck, who is our conservation programs manager. So the way the webinar will go tonight, there will be a presentation that will last about 45 minutes to an hour. After that, we will have an open discussion and Q&A session at the end. And if you have any questions at all during the presentation, please just type them into the chat box. And halfway through the presentation, we'll pause to take any questions that might have come up during the chat box and then continue. And the bulk of the discussion and Q&A session will be at the very end of the presentation. Additionally, when asking questions at the very end, there's a nifty tool called a hand raising feature. And if you'd like to voice your question, you can click participants at the bottom and then select the raise hand icon, and that will let us know you rose your hand, and you will be allowed to unmute yourself and ask a question as needed. And again, we'll just wait till the very end of the presentation for that. And then lastly, I'll also be sharing a survey at the very end of the presentation and webinar, and we just highly encourage that you fill this out. It'd just be great to hear from you what we can do to improve these kind of events in the future. And it's also great to be able to report and track what participants learn during our webinars. So with further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ali Ulwelling, and she will be sharing her screen, and enjoy.
Hi, there we go. Yeah, my first Zoom, whoops, unmute. Thank you, Michaela. I will go ahead and share the screen right away so we can get started and make sure we are on. Are we on? Thumbs up. Okay. So again, I'm Ali Ulwelling, Forestry Assistance Specialist for the DNRC. I've done wildfire prevention, education, and information over the past 5 years for the state, and have worked in fire as a firefighter previously, and I'm now working more in forestry. One of the reasons we invited Rick Connell to join us is because we here with the DNRC work really closely with the forest, with the Flathead National Forest, with Flathead County, with Glacier National Park, with our conservation district, just so people understand that we are all of us are talking, interacting, coordinating, and working together as partners frequently year round. So I'm going to make sure I can forward my slides here. There we go, I'll try that. All right, and I assume the reason we're here today, this is one of the things I like, is because I like to think that we're optimists, but hoping something bad doesn't happen is not nearly as good as planning for it to happen and then being pleasantly surprised when it doesn't. So part of the reason I enjoy this work is because it's an opportunity to provide people with tools to get prepared, to be an optimist and be prepared. So we're going to cover a lot. A lot of people, I think this is pretty simple. It's not as simple as you'd like it to be. There's a lot involved with fire and living with wildfire. So we're going to talk very briefly about fire in the forests that we choose to live in. We're going to talk about our home ignition zone, what that is, what that looks like, a little bit about forest health and how we can reduce fuels around our home and our property, some of the local programs that are available to people. And then in addition to that, we have some evacuation and some emergency planning. And then this whole fire adapted community concept and what that looks like. So we have a lot of people who are moving in from out of state. I don't know how many of us are native Montanans. I'm from Minnesota originally, so fire season to me didn't really mean anything until I lived in Colorado and then Utah and then Arizona, and then finally ended up here in Montana. Recognizing that the forests that we love, where we recreate, where we live, are and have adapted with fire. And so we are living in an ecosystem that has adapted with fire. So the trees that we love, the ponderosa pine, that thick corky bark of the ponderosa, and the Douglas fir, the serotinous cones of the lodgepole, those characteristics indicate that they have adapted with fire. So I mention that just because anybody who thinks that we're going to eliminate fire, it's just not going to happen. The idea is that we learn to live with fire on the landscape. It's always been here, and it will be. We will always have a fire season here in Montana, in Western Montana, and most of the West, actually. So very briefly again, if we've lived in places that have evolved and adapted with fire, and yet over the last century we've been suppressing fire, what does that mean? That means we've kind of been messing with our system a little bit, right? But we do it for good reason, because we are interested in protecting life, property, resources, homes, right? Communities. Like there's a good reason why we're really good at putting out fires. But after a century or so of fire suppression, we have this accumulation of forest fuels. And we pair that with what a lot of people recognize is a changing climate. And Rick will touch on this later. You're going to see this same graph later. But a lot of people recognize that for reasons that we're not going to get into, that the climate has seen fluctuations, and that affects fire seasons. Another thing is we have more and more people moving into what we call this wildland urban interface. We have a lot of that growth happening right now for different reasons. But everybody wants their little piece, right? Whether it's 2 acres or 5 acres or 20 acres or 200 acres, your piece of this piece of Montana, right? Why did you move here? Why do you live here? To be in that forest, to be in the wild, to have the huckleberries and the habitat and the views and the recreation, and what does this mean? This means that we are moving into forests that have adapted through the years with fire. So that leads to kind of a complex complex situation that we find ourselves in. So transitioning, another course, an entire course on fire behavior, right? Multiple courses in just a couple minutes apiece. The fire behavior triangle is something that we talk about in the fire world, and that is fuels, weather, and topography, right? It's not the fire triangle, heat, fuel, oxygen, but it's the fire behavior triangle. So when we talk about fuels, we're looking at, are they fine fuels? Are we looking at grasses, brush, timber, continuity of fuels across the landscape, both horizontally? Is it a field of cured grasses? Are we looking at thick forests? Are we looking at vertical continuity, right? Ladder fuels. What is the moisture of the fuels? What is the density of the fuels? And then we've got weather. How hot and dry is it? And then we have topography. So how does the topography affect the fuels, right? Like south-facing slopes look different than north-facing slopes. When you've got drainages, that funnels winds, right? So each of these things interplay to create fire conditions. So if we've got ladder fuels, or fuels that allow the fire to move from the ground up into the trees, and it's August, then that's going to happen. And you've got wind, right? So we start to look at fuels, weather, and topography. How do they play together? And I'm saying this because it's hard for me to give recommendations on what people can do around their home and their property without providing a little bit of background on the forest that you choose to live in and how fires start and how they spread. And so the recommendations that we have are based on fire behavior and some of this forest structure. So this slide, forest structure, I like this one. We're looking at surface fuels across the bottom. And then we have these ladder fuels that we have talked about. Again, allowing ladder fuels that would allow a fire to climb from the surface up into the branches, up into the tree crowns. And I look at this in a couple of different ways. The first on the left, I look at that as maybe it's spring, maybe it's wet, maybe it's April, right? The snow just melted off, it's rainy. You can have an abandoned campfire in a high wind and chances are it's not gonna go anywhere. And then we get a little bit further into the season and maybe we're looking at like low to moderate fire danger. So yeah, that abandoned campfire, it is gonna spread, but it's gonna probably skunk around on the ground a little bit. It might not climb into the trees. This week we went into high fire danger here in the Flathead. Well, maybe that's the third screen, you know, maybe that's the third part where fire starts easier, spreads faster, is harder to control. And then as we move into August and we're into very high or extreme fire danger, maybe that's the last one. So again, a little bit later on when we're talking about recommendations on what to do around your home and your property, some of the recommendations are how do we break up the fuels around our home and our property, both horizontally and vertically? How do we increase the spacing of the tree crowns? How do we remove some of those ladder fuels? So when a fire does come through, it doesn't move through so quickly and with such intensity. So we're breaking up those fuels. So I threw this one in because when we're looking at, you know, these last couple where fires are obviously starting and moving with some intensity, a red flag warning. And if you were all standing here in my auditorium, I would be asking you if you know what a red flag warning is, right? So when the Weather Service says there's a red flag warning today, that means we've got some warmer temperatures, we've got some lower humidities, and we've got some stronger winds. So we can expect those to produce some increased fire danger on that day. So this again is sort of that fuels, weather, topography. Red flag is telling us, you know what? The weather today is going to potentially produce some fires that might be more difficult to control. Another thing that I threw in here is just, I mentioned that our fire danger is high right now. Some people want to know, well, what does that mean? High fire danger, thanks. Well, that means that if there's abandoned campfire, if you've got dragging trailer chains, if there's a source of ignition, that those fine dead fuels or those cured grasses have the potential to ignite more readily than they did, say, 2 weeks ago after a little bit of rain. Unattended campfires are likely to escape. So fires spread rapidly, short distance spotting, right? Embers starting new fires. So this is just awareness. Part of living here, I think, is recognizing the forest you live in, and then also recognizing the conditions of the forest and how those conditions change through the season. So if you go to the Flathead National Forest website, on any given day, they have a little icon up there in the right-hand corner that tells you what the fire danger is. How do wildfires spread? Obviously, I think we've all seen videos, photos, news coverage of fires, and we know that they move across the landscape. But again, a lot of the recommendations that we give to people preparing home and property for wildfire has to do with, yes, how they move across the landscape, but also awareness that embers or firebrands produced by wildfires can travel. If you're looking at this column and you're seeing all this heat rising, all this energy, the wind, it's twisting and it's tossing firebrands and embers ahead of the fire. And when it's August and we have low fuel moistures, then those are considered receptive fuels for ignition, right? So you've got a burning ember that is now landing and starting a new fire. And you've got a bunch of spot fires that eventually grow together. And that's how fires often grow and move so quickly and create such a complex environment for firefighters who are fighting those fires. So recognizing that embers can travel over a mile. In fact, Rick, maybe you know, I don't, but I have heard in a fire in the past that embers were blowing over who had traveled and started fires on the other side of the Hungry Horse Reservoir, which is hard to imagine, but you know, that provides a local example of that happening. The other thing it does is if we, again, are choosing to build our cute little homes in the middle of this urban interface, and I have gutters and I'm really busy, so I don't want to clean up my gutters right now. And the needles that have fallen from the Doug fir and the ponderosa pine and the larch have all accumulated in my gutters. And then they dry in the sun of summer. Those are also considered receptive fuel beds where now those embers and firebrands could potentially land and start my home on fire. So that's the other thing we're looking at is embers landing, blowing around, accumulating in those places where we have leaves, needles, dry grass around the perimeter of our home, under the deck, on the deck, in the gutters, in the complex roof, you know, the places where they catch in your roof systems. So the importance of keeping those areas clean. So these are links, Michaela. I don't know if you're popping them into the chat box or not, but this is one of the Institute of Business and Home Safety has worked with Jack Cohen, a fire science researcher, and they have this building that you see is on a big turntable. And they have built these homes of different construction materials, and they have an ember generator where they just shovel mulch into this generator. They throw embers at these structures, and then they try to find out like where are the vulnerabilities? How do homes ignite? What can we do to keep homes from igniting? And so you can see this is wood mulch, and they built it with, you know, shake shingles, which, you know, makes it easy. But I think a lot of us have wood mulch, you know, because we like gardening and we like landscaping. We like to have that sort of framing our perimeter of our home. But maybe that's not the best idea if you're going to have wood siding as well. And then some people question, okay, that's a lab setting. That is, you know, in a big airport, in a big airplane hangar, and then you have this turntable. Well, the larger fire on the right is an actual fire situation. So it is actually like that. There are actually embers swirling around and landing in places and starting new fires. So again, I just mentioned Jack Cohen, who's a fire science researcher retired from the Missoula Fire Sciences Lab, who has looked at fire behavior in the lab setting. Back in the 90s, he did crown fire research up in Canada, like starting crown fires. A lot of that was set to test fire shelter material, Nomex fire clothing that firefighters wear. But he also had panels of wood set up at different distances to find out when those panels or structures would ignite. And that's, again, where some of this guidance comes from that we're going to talk about. He also took post-fire investigations. So he's looking at a fire has come through subdivisions, neighborhoods, and he's saying, all right, so what started, like, how did this home actually ignite? Was it the home? Was it the construction? Was it the vegetation surrounding it? What conditions existed to actually burn some of these structures down? And I have heard him speak a few different times, and one of the things that he had observed was in some of the subdivisions, homes that were left standing had for sale signs in front of them. And he pauses for a moment and lets you think, and you're like, oh, right. Because when you're gonna sell your house, what do? You clean it up. Everything is clean, everything is tidy, you've done all the raking, you mowed your lawn, everything is, you know, ready to sell. And so he deduced that some of those structures that had been cleaned were better able to withstand some of the fires that had come through, or the fire that had hit that area. So based on what we've learned from Jack Cohen and his research and some fire behavior, he came up with, and it's been a while, this is not new, this home ignition zone concept. So the home ignition zone starts with your home, and it starts with, you know, how clean your roof is. Do you have moss growing? Do you have, again, needles and leaves on the roof, in the gutters? Is your siding, is it peeling? Is it cracked? Is it low maintenance, or does it need some repair? Are there cracks and crevices where embers again could accumulate? Or, you know, would the embers essentially bounce off and fall to the ground? The other recommendation is the 3 to 5 foot non-combustible perimeter. So if you do have embers swirling around, are they going to land on again, a receptive fuel bed? Or is there concrete, maybe some stone, maybe some routinely irrigated wood chips, and not, you know, 6 inches of wood chips, but maybe just a little, you know, a thin layer of wet wood chips? So looking at that perimeter, again, from there, we move out to 30 feet. This is an area that we like to see. I've heard it lean, clean, and green. You're sort of creating this buffer around your home where you've got short grass, irrigated, you know, you save your favorite shade trees. Maybe you plant a couple conifers, or sorry, not conifers, deciduous trees, maybe a couple of maples, something that is less flammable, less volatile as the conifers that we traditionally or would have around our homes living here. So again, crown spacing, opening up the crowns between the trees. And then we move out from that 30 foot out to 100 foot, out to 200 foot if you've got the space. And a lot of us here, we have the space to manage that 100 to 200 feet around our home and create a place that it makes it a little easier to protect or defend in the event of a wildfire. Or the idea is that you've created this survivable space that a fire comes through, it can burn through and keep going, and your house is left standing. So these are some local examples. This is a home assessment that we did out around Ashley Lake a couple of years ago. New construction, log construction. If you're starting a campfire, do you start it with logs and a match? Not usually. So the logs, when people are like, oh, but that's wood construction. Well, it is, but logs are not considered flammable, really. Again, depending on condition. Are they chinked? Are they sealed? You know, what is the condition of the log and the construction itself? It's clean, it's tidy. You can see that non-combustible perimeter. You can see the asphalt shingle roof. They've done a really thoughtful job of their construction. This is out near Olney, another guy, 20 acres, I think, who has, again, thoughtfully, he's got hardy plank siding. He's got a clean, non-combustible perimeter between the stone work, the rock work, the short irrigated grass, clean gutters. He was sort of a shining example, which is why I took pictures of his place. I was like, Ray, you've done such a good job here. You live out in the woods, but this is what it can look like. Again, the folks back at Ashley, looking at their construction of their home, their garage, and then some of that Firewise landscaping and hardscaping. So more rock work, more stone paths, creating that space around their place. So introducing some of the Firewise landscaping and hardscaping concepts. You know, if you're thinking about putting in a stone patio, that's a great idea. Embers skitter across, they're not going to ignite anything. Stonework, short irrigated grass, again, sort of examples of what people have done around their homes to incorporate non-combustible features. An example of a little cabin in the woods, what these folks did. They cleared out some of that ponderosa pine. They raked a bunch of the leaves and the pine cones. Looks like they've got a hose system of some sort set up. So even if it's not a fancy home and it's just a little cabin in the woods, like some of us live in, there's still work that can be done and things you can do to better prepare yourself for fire season. Another friend up in Glacier Hills near Martin City, and some work that he and his wife have done. Again, hardy plank siding, asphalt shingle roof, clean. You can see where they've thinned out the forest around them. Non-combustible perimeter, again, good examples of folks who have sort of thoughtfully done the work around their place. And the idea is a lot of homes in wildfires are lost to both embers on the structure or low intensity ground fires approaching the structure. So the idea is that you have created a place where if firefighters are able to respond, they can better sort of herd that fire around your home. Or ideally, firefighters cannot respond and your home is, again, still left standing. So understanding that all of this requires a little bit of maintenance, right? It means you have to get out there, you have to clean out the gutters, you've got to rake those leaves and needles out away from the perimeter of your home. It means doing a little bit of work. I know I talked to a group recently and I was like, I'm so sorry. I feel like I'm giving you this list of things to do, but that's kind of what it is. There's a little bit of a list of things to do. So if you're looking for guidance, the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation has service foresters and firefighters who are available to come out and assist with some of the recommendations or with some guidance. So here in the Flathead in the Kalispell area, Rick Moore is our service forester. If you've got some acres and you're interested in what's going on with forest, any insects and diseases, you're wondering what's going on with my forest, he is a great guy to call. Down in Polson, we've got another, Sean Morgan, Lake County, the Swan Unit. So you're interested in getting started, but you don't really know what to do. Give us a call. We can help with that. So again, maybe you've got some red needles, maybe you've got some trees that are dying and you want to know what's going on here and can I do anything about it. That's what a service forester does. They come on out. And the reason that's connected to wildfire is because dead trees are more susceptible, right, to fire. So we're looking at forest health and wildfire together. So this is an example. Rick and I were out together and we noticed that a lot of these trees were absolutely debarked and the woodpeckers had been getting in there, taking off all the bark, and they were going after this flat-headed wood borer. And that's what was affecting the trees down at Wayfarer State Park, down outside Big Fork. This just came out recently. This is a Doug fir tussock moth. And if any of you have Doug fir in your property, maybe you've seen these little guys because there's a current outbreak of the Doug fir tussock moth going on. And I know I've got these all over the place. I'm squishing them underfoot. So again, insects and disease questions, service foresters available. Our fire crew, we have a community preparedness and fire prevention specialist. His name is Ernie. He's been on the DNRC fire crew for a bunch of years, and he is available to come out and take a walk around your home with you. Let's take a look at your roof, your siding, some of the vulnerabilities, and provide some guidance. All right, you decide you want to get a little bit of work done, and you think, gosh, the cost per acre is kind of prohibitive. Well, there are some programs we call cost share programs, grant funding that can help offset the cost of some of this work. One is the Northwest Montana Hazardous Fuels Program. Deb Starling is their lead forester. Call her up and she can help you. Or if you're south of the Flathead County line down in Lake County, we have other programs available. We also have the Natural Resources and Conservation Service, which is based out of the same office as the Flathead Conservation District right here in Kalispell. And they are also providing some funding for work. That said, the government agencies are being directed to be more targeted on the landscape. So we need to be putting the money on the ground in neighborhoods, communities, drainages, and making that money go further on the ground by helping create fire adapted communities and resilient landscapes. So there may not be funding for your area yet, but we're working on things. If there isn't funding, you want to get started, well, sometimes it means calling a friend, having a work party, firing up the pickup, the chainsaw, and doing a little cleanup around your place on your own. So a lot of times that's what I'm doing. I've got friends who come over and drop a couple trees, have a couple burn piles, get a little bit of work done. So this is just a reminder that right now it's fire season. So please, no debris burning during fire season. That's July, August, and September. In the spring and the fall, so March and April, and March, April, May, and June, actually, you can burn. You just need permits in May and June. And then in the fall, October, November, there's open burning. So if you're doing this kind of work, you've got some dead trees, you want to burn some branches, this is when you can do those activities. Don't worry, we have all kinds of resources and links. You don't have to write this down. We can help with that later. We're not going to get any questions right now. Typically, if we were in person, we would take a break because that's sort of the what you can do around your home and your property segment. But if you have questions, like Michaela said, go ahead and put them in the chat box. We're going to keep moving forward. So other things to consider, what does your place look like for first responders to access? And I'm talking dark, smoky, snowy, blizzard. What does it look like when you call 911 and you're I don't even know the situation. There's a fire, somebody's hurt. There's a lot of reasons why having a clear, reflective, contrasting, non-combustible address sign at the end of your driveway and at your house is really important. So here's an example of some folks out on Dam Trail. And you think about that, like it's really hard to see. It's quite attractive, but it is hard to see. And then it's also covered in snow in the wintertime. So again, when you're calling 911 and you want your local volunteer fire department to respond quickly, I'm just making the push that you make it as easy as possible for them. Because Lincoln Shute, our fire service area manager, isn't here tonight, I'm plugging for them. The other thing is, do you have an emergency plan in place for your family? And there are lots of reasons to have an emergency plan in place, and it's not just because of fire. So again, if you're leaving because of a fire, where are you going to go? What are you going to take with you? Do you have an emergency kit? Do you have supplies for a few days? What are the most important papers, documents you would want to have with you? Do you have a complete home inventory? So if your home does burn down and you have to now deal with insurance, how is that process going to go? Do you have a list of sentimental items that can help guide you when you are stressed out and you need to evacuate and you don't know, you can't think clearly? So the idea is simply that we go through these exercises ahead of time. And I know that there are a couple of people on here who have done this because they're planners and they are meticulous. And I know that there are some of us who are well-intentioned but haven't done it quite yet. We have a general idea. And I encourage you to take this fire season, maybe when we go, like maybe on Saturday morning, maybe find a time where you have an hour or two and you just make a list. You just walk around the house and you say, what are those things? If the sheriff's department or a firefighter knocked on my door and said it was time to evacuate, what would I want to take with me? What couldn't I live without? And I find that having gone through this exercise myself, the sentimental items, the baby books, those pictures, like the computer, the camera, those things that are absolutely irreplaceable come to the top of the list pretty quickly. And that box or that file of important papers. Right? Home inventory. I talked to my home insurance and that's what he said. He's like, go to every room, stand in the corner of every room, take pictures, open the drawers, take video, right? So just sort of have a home inventory, have documentation of everything that you've got in your house, just in case that really bad day does happen. So again, being ready for evacuation. And again, it's not just me, it's me and my 5-year-old. It's me and my stock. It's me and my pets. It's me and my grandfather, right? It's, okay, so who do I have everything that I need for everybody who's evacuating? And what is my plan? What are we going to bring and where are we going to go? Smoke is a big deal. Smoke is a big deal. So how do you know, what do you know about air quality? And the Flathead City County Health Department has a website to go to. This is a snip from today. It's just airnow.gov. And this is this morning. I think we all noticed it was a little bit hazy. And sure enough, the radio is saying, yep, up in Libby, decreased air quality. So you can see the gray there is where the smoke is. And Rick could talk more about this because he's more of a smoke guy than I am. This is just really easy and quick to see. Where's that smoke coming from? What is the current air quality? But I know that smoke and air quality is a big deal, so this is one of those resources available. You're wondering what fires are going on locally. The DNRC has an interactive wildland fire map on their website, so you can go and take a look at what's going on locally. This is obviously from a couple of years ago. You can see there's the Howe Ridge fire. This is satellite heat-seeking imagery. They're showing the Howe Ridge fire, the Coal Ridge fire, the Whale Butte fire, that lightning storm that came through the middle of August a couple of years ago. And this was the result of that. So there are maps and places you can go. I like to take this along with InsaWeb, and InsaWeb will give you an update, right? If there is a team or if it's a fire of any significance, there'll be an update associated with it. There's also, I didn't put a slide in here, but Kalispell Interagency Dispatch. So any fire, any response is also on our WildWeb dispatch page. So that's all the small fires, 1/10 of an acre, 2/10 of an acre, and you can see where it was and who responded and what the current status of that fire is. I work with the DNRC, I work for the DNRC, but I'm also part of, and so is Rick, and so is the county, and so are local community members, businesses, Firesafe Flathead. So we are here we are individuals, neighborhoods, businesses, organizations, and wildfire professionals working together to help create fire-adapted communities and resilient landscapes in the Flathead area. So again, that's my phone number. It goes directly to my office, and all you have to do is call, and I don't have all the answers. What I do is call other people and say, hey, what do you know about this? Who's available? Where's the cost share funding right now? And can help at least get you the answer, or get the person who can give you the answer. So that's us. I wanted to mention some of the greater initiatives that are going on right now. So right now we're in the middle of this reviewing and revising and updating the Montana Forest Action Plan. So this has been a huge effort of collaborative partners across the state producing a statewide assessment of fire risk, insects, and disease. So this is going to help us identify some of the priority areas for work. And I can tell you that there are a lot of priority areas for work surrounding the Flathead area and Lincoln County and Sanders County. There are a lot of priorities here in Northwest Montana. So we've got Firesafe Flathead. We have the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, where we go. There's a whole community of people talking about what is the best way to get work done. How do we better coordinate agencies and communities? How do we get more done? Fire Adapted Montana is another one. So if anybody's interested in becoming involved, if you are interested in a site visit, if you're interested in sharing your success story, I would really like to hear that. So that sort of wraps up what you can do around home and property, local resources available to you, emergency planning, evacuation. There should be a bunch of links in the chat box that can help you. And then Rick, because, you know, a lot of people are interested in what you can do, but then they're also really interested in, you know, it's 94 degrees. So what about this fire season? What do you think, Rick?
You bet. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ali. So yeah, she's got tomatoes, because usually I start getting the question about January 15th, February 1st, what's fire season going to be like? And I'm like, there's 7 feet of snow out there. I have no freaking idea. But so I tell people, if you can tell me what your tomatoes are going to look like in August, I can tell you in January, I can tell you what fire season is going to be looking like. And it's really a good surrogate, because you need warm, dry weather to grow tomatoes fairly well. So next. So quickly, just a quick graph on where we were last year and how that relates. You can look at the map and the Northern Rockies, Montana, Idaho, North Idaho, and North Dakota. You know, we didn't look like we were going to have a big season early, and it basically played out that way. You can see down on the bottom that the average and the mowed acres burned, both for the region and for the Flathead specifically. So this is the Flathead National Forest, are the two different columns of numbers that I'm describing here. And the left column with the red, yellow, and green boxes around the dates and acres burned. They're sorted on acres burned in both. And you can see that 2017 was the big year. We had 1.5 million acres across the Northern Rockies from North Dakota to North Idaho. But you can see highlighted in yellow down below, 2019 was 72,000 acres. That was a bit of a below average fire year based on how the Northern Rockies Coordinating Center groups their data. I group our data a little different. I use that AA as a, extreme, above average, average, and below average. Again, you can see how those years kind of group. Again, they're sorted by acres burned. And you can see 2019 was kind of in the middle of the pack there with 35 fires for the Flathead National Forest and 1,800 acres. Again, when you go back to the mean average acres, 30,000 acres would put you, at the upper end, between the 94 and the 2017 years, whereas the mode is a little bit more applicable, being the middle of the list of numbers, okay? So always be heads up when you hear people talking about averages, because that skews your data depending on your data set. Next. Okay, so here's that graph that Ali also had. Just real quick, I wanted to talk about historic fires. So the left side of that graph starts in 1889 and goes to the right side of the graph, which is 2019. And you can see that the pointy data from 1889 to about 1930, we had a lot of fire around the valley here, or around the Flathead area. It's about 1.4 million acres burned over that time period. And so on the writer's side, from 1988 to present, we burned about 900,000 acres. So, what happened in the middle, there's a variety of factors that contribute to the lack of significant fire events for a very long time. It was, one, as Ali said, we got really good at putting out fires. It wasn't as hot and dry during some of those periods. We have a lot of technology challenges out there. We were doing a lot more in the woods. We had a lot more people as far as lookouts is another example. So those are just, you always see the right side of the graph, you never see the left side of the graph. So that was my point, was to show when we see a lot of fire on the landscape, we've always had a lot of fire on the landscape. Okay, next graph. So as far as where our conditions are, this chart and set of charts, I produce weekly, and I'll just explain what that is. And it's a trend from April 1st to November 1st across the bottom. It's tracking energy release component, which is basically if you have a fire and at the head of a fire, a square foot of that flame front would produce enough BTUs, enough heat basically, and then we characterize that into a standardized number that we kind of track. So it tells us how flammable and how hard things might be to suppress if you're going after it. So the solid gray line in the middle is the average for the trend line, and then the red line across the top, the very top line, is the max. And then there's 2017 and 2015 are dashed lines to kind of give you an idea on some extreme seasons. And the shortest line, the green one, that just comes up to about right now and is just a hair below the average line, is where we are today. So you can see that through the spring, we've bounced up and down around the average line. We're just now coming up to it again, and we're also nearing the peak. You can see that around the 1st of August is the peak of the fire season generally, not to say that some years aren't a little later or different, but that's what we are looking at currently. And so now the question is are we really going to get to a significant season like 15 and 17? The graphs, which are a little bit hard to see on the right side, kind of group those historic years into different categories that I created. So the top chart talks about the typical fire season, where the blue line kind of follows the gray line, which would be average type conditions. And you can see on that chart that there's different years that kind of equate roughly to that typical fire season. You have an early fire season, where we have a lot of dry conditions in early on. That doesn't necessarily generate a lot of fires, but does cause a lot of angst and consternation with folks, and typically leads to a bit of a enhanced fire season. Below average, where your fire season is below the average, as it would kind of indicate. Extreme seasons, 15, 17, 2003, some good years to think of that are setting the new records in those typical years. And then you've got the late season, where the peak of the graph is after the early August time frame is what my definition of a late season. And then in Indian summer, we usually get a rain event, a weather event in early September that kind of takes the brunt of the fire season away, but sometimes you get a rebound in the fall. That's what we kind of articulate. So if you look at the 2000 graph, the big graph, which is, even though it says through 2019, that's just for the max. The blue or the green line is the 2020 actual values. If you try and pick what years, what does that match up to the graphs on the left, on the right? I mean, well, obviously it's not early, probably not going to be below average, maybe typical. So that's still an option. Extreme, we're probably not going to have an extreme year unless we go really late. So late and Indian summer are also still at potential play. So every week we're looking at these graphs, trying to figure out where we think we're going to land in the future. So let's move on to the next graph. So to help us out, we look at some other data sets. The U.S. Drought Monitor, talking about soil moisture for the most part. What are those conditions? You can look across northern Montana and, we don't seem to be in very droughty conditions, kind of down there in the southwest Dillon country, and over in eastern Montana and parts of North Dakota, as far as around here. And this is just a week or so old. So it looks fairly good for us, whereas you can see down in Colorado, Utah, north the panhandle of Texas are the kind of extreme events, and then the West Coast as well. Next. So other things we look at, the Weather Service produces some long-term weather outlooks, and these maps are probabilities, okay? They're not saying that the one on the left is temperature and the one on the right is precip. So they're just saying what is the likelihood of the probability that you're going to have above average is the red, the green would be wet in the precip side, and blue, if it had any on the states on the left, would be wet and cool on the temperature side. So you can see we're basically staying for August, July, or August, September, October. The whole U.S. is going to have a higher probability of warmer than average temperatures. That could just be 1 degree, it could be 10 degrees, but that's not telling you anything about that. It's just saying the highest probability of above average temperature is the desert Southwest, west, and southern Nevada and California. You look at the precip graph, looks like, for our part of Montana, that we're probably going to be about an average chance of either wet, dry, or about average. There's an even chance for anything. They can't really tell, is what that kind of interpretates to. Okay, next. So the National Fire Center in Boise takes all kinds of information from the predictive service areas, the National Weather Service, et cetera, and produces a significant fire potential. So this is where they're saying, and you'll notice it's above normal, normal, or below normal are the three categories. Earlier in April, they were showing Northwest Montana as going to have an above average fire potential for July. And they've backed off on that because we had a pretty wet June. So you can see here in July that they did back off, and the whole Northern Rockies is not going to be above average. Next. You can see though that in August, they're thinking that with those warmer temperatures, maybe potentially dry, that there is potential for some above normal precip. And again, normal, you got to go back to that first chart with, what does that mean, acres burned across the Northern Rockies? And so it's just something for us to look at. And you can see the Southeast US is going to be pretty much below normal, which is their green up is now, so they usually don't have much fire in the August timeframe. Okay, next. September looks like it's going to hold on. That's a little questionable. Like I said, usually we have an event, usually the second or third week of September, that kind of takes the teeth out of the fire season. So we'll be watching. This maybe leads you to think that maybe we won't see that. So we'll keep an eye on it. And then October is next. And you can see that the significant fire season opportunity drops readily after September, which is pretty typical that it shrinks back to California for the most part, at least for October. Okay, next.
Okay. Well, I think, thank you, Rick. I'm sure you'll have a couple of questions. We are nearing the end. We just have a couple of slides left. I know that there were a bunch of, again, links in the chat box, and a lot of that is this. It's just, how do we stay aware of conditions? How do we stay informed with fire season? Flathead OES, the Office of Emergency Services, has a Facebook page, and so often Firesafe Flathead, the Flathead National Forest, the DNRC, the county, we coordinate and use that platform to share some fire information. That hasn't really ramped up yet, but oftentimes we do. Firesafe Flathead has a Facebook page. I try to share fire information as much as possible and fire updates on that. Again, open burn seasons, air quality, smoke, preparedness, local resources, all here. And I can send this to anybody if you just want a whole list of what to do. So really, just wrapping it up, it's just understanding that we choose to live in these fire-adapted forests, and there are a lot of us here who are working together to create fire-adapted communities and resilient landscapes. And I like to leave sort of asking people, which one of these homes is yours? So are you the person on the left, or are you the family on the right? And it's not just the physical characteristics and what you've done around your place, but I like to think that it's sort of the mindset of the people who live there. Are they planners? Are they thinking ahead? Are they optimists? Are they preparing and hoping? Are they hoping it doesn't happen, or are they preparing and then being pleasantly surprised when it doesn't happen, right? So the person on the left, I like to think, has that evacuation list, right? They know what a red flag warning is. They know that we're currently in high fire danger. They know how to put out their campfire. They're aware, and they're doing what they need to do to live in the forests of Northwest Montana. And the people on the right, ideally, they talk to their neighbors and they can get started. Anyway, lots of resources available. Anybody can call me at any time, and we can help out in whatever way. So I think we're available for questions, if there are any.
Great, yes, thanks, Ali and Rick. So right now we don't have any questions yet in the chat box, but if anyone has a question, you can either post in the chat box or unmute yourself to ask. Again, there's also the raise the hand action under participants at the bottom, and you can see raise hand, but please feel free to ask some questions for both Rick and Ali.
Questions, comments, we're open to anything. This is pretty informal.
Looks like Samantha raised her hand, so here we go.
Thanks, Ali and Rick. I do have a question. I was wondering if there's like an ideal time to reach out to you guys, to professionals to come out and do a consultation on your property, because I assume, you know, people get really busy during the fire season, but then again, maybe it's better to see the property during fire conditions. Is there any guidance from you guys on that?
You know, we take phone calls all the time. Midwinter is really hard. Early spring, you're right. Like, it makes it easy because we're more available, but it's also kind of hard when it's raining and you're chilly and you're wearing a stocking cap and a rain jacket to talk about how easily your home would ignite. So while it's convenient and we want people to do that work in advance of fire season, I think mentally it's hard to imagine. But it's a good time to do it in the spring. Fire season comes around and it depends on how busy we are. Ernie works with the fire crew, and he would come out, or he would come out with one of his fire crew, and they are doing home assessments right now, and they are targeting different neighborhoods, and they are getting out there and having those conversations. And ideally, you know, like, one person calls, and the question I ask is, so where do you live, and how many acres do you have, and how many neighbors do you have, and do you think we could get some of your neighbors, and let's do a walk around together. And then if there's enough interest and enough acres, well, let's start working on a hazardous fuels reduction cost share grant. And then we can apply for $50,000 quarterly, and we can, you know, push some money towards that area and get some of that fuels reduction work done. So that's the way I envision this, right? But any call, we will do what we can to get out there as quick as possible. Good question, Samantha. Thank you. Alan Chrisman, anything from you? Oh, Alan must not be there.
All I have to do is figure out how to unmute my button there, Ali.
Oh, no.
Okay.
It's okay, Alan.
Thank you, and Rick, for your presentation. Rick, always enjoy listening to your assessment of where we're at in the fire season, what we have to look forward to. And yes, we'll have some beer in November and review how it really was.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions or comments? Please feel free just to unmute. Oh, looks like Samantha has another question. Here you are.
Okay, I've got another one for you. I was curious, because I've never really known the answer to this. Are fires suppressed, historically suppressed, I guess I should say, on national forest land and like wilderness areas, or has the focus for historical suppression been in that WUI zone? And so, like, are we seeing a pattern on the landscape that reflects that, like more intense fires in that WUI zone, or are we just seeing it across the board?
You want that one?
Yes. So yeah, the answer is yes. We had a period, a very long period, where nationally the focus was fire is bad. You know, the 1910 fires, you know, as well as a lot of other fires in the late 1800s and early 1900s were very devastating. Lots of loss of life. Whole communities were destroyed. And so nationally, especially the Forest Service policy was, you know, we called it the 10 a.m. policy. If you couldn't get the fire out by 10 a.m. today, you tried for 10 a.m. tomorrow, and we hit fires hard, and we hit them often. And it wasn't until we really started researching first in the Southeast in the U.S., where they have a very high frequency, which is fire down there is like every 3 to 5 years. And if you don't burn on that high frequency, the accumulation of fuels, because it's so moist and so much rain down there, grows so much that then you have catastrophic fires on a grand scale. Out here in the West, we're a lot drier than the Southeast, so we're not quite on that same scale, but that gets to that point where I was talking on that 1890 to present graph, that one of the reasons for that droughty period was because we were going after a lot of fire. But also, if you look at it, if you burn 1 million acres in timber, and timber is the main fuel, and it's a 100 to 300 year return interval before fire will come back into a timber stand in our country, wouldn't you think it'd be about 100 years before that cycle restarted? So, you know, it's not just because we got really good at putting out fires, it's because we needed the trees to grow back to create the forest to then burn again. So it's a complex situation and a complex answer to that. That'll be the next webinar.
Rick, I have a question. Can you talk at all about the latitude that you have on the forest to monitor fires or not suppress right away? Or do you guys, is that like in wilderness areas, or where is that allowed?
So on the Flathead National Forest, we have, well, first of all, there's only one type of fire, wildfire. There's not resource benefit, prescribed natural fire, all these terms that we've used in the past to talk about and label fires. They're just wildfires. So really what the question is and what the answer is what's the objective of the fire? If the fire is in the WUI in that picture that you've got up on the slide right there, and it's between those two houses, that's high values at risk, and we're gonna go after that fire with everything we can. If you're very remote up the North Fork, but not in wilderness, but it's very remote and it's a benign fire season and it's a higher risk for firefighters to go in because there's maybe a lot of dead trees, then we may not necessarily put a lot of activity on. So for the Forest Service specifically and the Flathead explicitly, we've got that full latitude of what kind of actions we will or won't take. And again, it's based on what's the risk. Is it risk to values? Is it hot, dry, windy, 2017 or 2015, then we're probably going to go after a lot more fires. 2019, last summer, you know, we put out some fires and we didn't put out some fires, and it's safer and it's cheaper if we've got that option.
Good.
So one other thing, seeing as nobody's asking a question, that I didn't bring up that I had a note to was COVID. You know, this year, COVID's a big impact on firefighting. And so one of the things we're doing, well, we're doing a lot of things, but the biggest thing we're doing is we're trying to keep COVID in the fire camp if we have a large, you know, a lot of people on an incident, and then not give it to a community, a subdivision or whatever. So we're going to be, you know, separating ourselves a lot more than we have in the past. So the public may not see us as friendly, so to speak, not, you know, a lot of guys getting out of the engine and going and, you know, chit-chatting and everything, because we're trying to deal with that COVID mitigation. You know, don't take that personally. It's just, we don't want to bring COVID home to our families, and we don't want to give it to your families. And we've been really good at this. The fires down in Arizona, New Mexico have had thousands of firefighters go through them, and we've had very low COVID exposure, and a lot less because they've been in Tucson and Phoenix. And we've had a lot less exposure, confirmed cases within our fire camps than we've actually seen in those communities. So I know that's a big concern for a lot of the public, and I just thought I'd put that for us.
That's good to hear.
I have a question. Do you find in the Flathead, are the cause of fires more like naturally caused, or is a large part of that human caused from campfires and different things like that?
Yeah, so depending on what piece of ground you're talking about, you know, one, lightning hangs out at higher elevations naturally. So the forest has a higher preponderance of natural lightning caused fires. You know, we're 65 to 70% lightning, 30% human cause and whatever, and that varies from year to year. Whereas the low country, a lot of state, local government protection is a lot more human-caused fires. But when you map them out, you see that they're also along all of our major roads. You know, so that's another thing I didn't talk about was this year, as you all probably are well aware of, we've got a lot of visitors and a lot of people in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
Every open spot on a road has a camper, a tent. Every spot on the lake has a boat on it. So we've got a lot more people than people have ever seen around the valley. And that's a big concern is human-caused fires here as we go forward.
Good point.
All right, do we have any more questions at all for Ali or Rick? Please feel free just to unmute yourself and ask. Don't be shy.
I would just
All right.
encourage anybody, if you do have questions or follow-up, if you are looking for advice, forest advice, assessment, if you want to get involved with our local Firesafe Flathead group, we're always looking for folks. So yeah, thank you to the Conservation District for inviting us. This is, we think this is important stuff, so appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and thank
Yes,
you
thank
both
you.
so much for taking your time. And for the few people we have left too, I'm posting a survey. I would love if you could take a few moments just to go fill that out to get some feedback on the webinar. And yeah, please reach out if you have any more questions for Rick or Ali.
Excellent presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate that.
Yep,
Thank
thanks.
you again. All right, well, I'll stop sharing.
Ali and Rick, we usually just leave the meeting open for a little while after, just to make sure that people have access to that survey link, but you guys are welcome to hop off whenever you feel the urge. And thanks again so much for doing this. We really appreciate all the great information.
So you're just going to have this posted on the conservation webpage, so we could just link to it on our Facebook page or something.
Yeah, we'll post it on our Facebook page too, and I think we can tag you guys, and it'll